We all have a right to be ourselves, and the people who truly love us will accept us in all of our imperfections, but also challenge us to be the best version of ourselves that we can be. This duality can take the shape of friendships where we aren't afraid to call each other out, butt heads, and disagree. But it can also take the shape of romantic relationships where we accept each other, give ourselves space to grow, and sometimes let each other go. When I first watched Toradora, it spoke to that part of me that had heard these truths before, but hadn't fully come to terms with what they meant for me and how they applied to my life. To be totally transparent, I still don't think I have. I don't think I ever will. But like the characters in Toradora, I can try to be true to myself and sacrifice myself to the art of loving in hopes of finding that one special person or people who make me feel like I'm home, but who also aren't afraid to clean up their rooms, tell me to clean mine, and help me try to keep the common area spotless. But what is love anyway? And how does one learn to love? Well, those are two age-old questions, and I'm not about to sit here and tell you that I have the definitive answers. I don't think anyone does. But I do think that some people have tried really hard to answer those questions, and that some people have done a damn good job of scratching the surface of what exactly love is, and how we should best equip ourselves to love other people. I think the anime version of Toradora does a damn good job of scratching the surface of what learning how to love looks like, just like I think the social philosopher Erich Fromm does a damn good job of scratching the surface of what love is, and what principles we should keep in mind as we try to practice it. And so, what I'm gonna do today is to try to put Toradora and Erich Fromm together. Hopefully most of us can get a lesson or two about what love is, what love isn't, how to love, and how not to love, by putting this anime and this author in conversation with one another. The first time I listened to the opening monologue of Toradora, I didn't really get it. To be honest, I am still not sure I fully do. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the point is to say that love isn't really something that can be understood by the individual person. Maybe the point is that love is absolutely relative. Like a gas, it fills the room no matter how much of it there is. And even though we can't necessarily see it, we can certainly feel its effects. And we want to feel those effects. At least most of us do. It's why Minori describes love as a ghost, and why Ryuji agrees. We chase love and put ourselves into scary and risky situations, trick ourselves into watching scary movies or go into a haunted house, even knowing that we might get spooked. In fact, knowing that getting spooked or getting our hearts broken is a part of the game. And yet we persist. We persist because we yearn for that experience of fully embracing another person and of being fully embraced by them. We yearn for unity, as Erich Fromm might say, because we live our entire lives separated from each other. But what form does that yearning for unity take? And what form doesn't it take? What separates the movie monster and the ghost in the haunted house from the genuine article? We've all, or at least many of us, have had that experience of meeting another human being who walked into our life and within a matter of seconds, days, or weeks had us totally spellbound. It's a great feeling. I know, it happened to me 3 months ago, but that is not what love is. As a matter of fact, that miraculous moment is what Erich Fromm calls falling in love. And I know it sounds like I'm just getting caught up in semantics, but trust me, there's a difference. And we're gonna talk about it right now. So, when you fall in love with someone, you're totally starstruck. You're spellbound. You are taken for a loop, at least for a moment. But then you start to get to know the other person, and maybe you realize that they're not all that they're cracked up to be. You start to see that they have flaws too. And then slowly but surely, your ideal image of that person starts to fall apart until all you have left is a pile of disagreements and complaints. Or you fall head over heels for someone. You think, boy, I could really see myself marrying this girl. And then they do something that makes you realize that you overcalculated how much you meant to them. They run the fuck away. And then they don't respond to your text messages asking them what happened. If this sounds like something that's happened to you, then congratulations, we're brothers. Because it's happened to me like 7 times. Shit, I've done it to people too. And I'm sure you have as well. But we can all agree, that shit sucks. What's interesting is that in both these sets of experiences, in disillusionment as well as in ghosting, we often learn a lot about ourselves. We learn that miraculous moment, if it ever existed for both parties, was in fact transitory. And it is revealed to us that perhaps we didn't really like the other person that much. Maybe we were just lonely, and now having departed from them after that unique experience of breaking down the barriers between us, we may even end up despising the person. Feeling like maybe the contrast between two strangers is now heightened more than it was before we ever started to get to know them. Anyways, so people fall in love in Toradora all the time. Yusaku falls in love with Taiga. As a soft-spoken and diligent guy, he's attracted to her abrasive and straightforward personality. She then falls in love with him, rather ironically, shortly after rejecting his early confession. Underneath her tough exterior, she's shy and soft-spoken, where he's courageous in matters of the heart. So she, like him, ends up being attracted to the traits that she feels may complete her. Ryuji falls in love with Minori about a year before the start of the show. He sees her affable and bubbly nature and devil-may-care attitude as a counterbalance to his off-putting appearance and moderately reserved demeanor. Minori likewise falls in love with Ryuji throughout the course of the story because he exemplifies something that she lacks. He is able to prioritize and take ownership of his authentic feelings and put himself first in a way that she is not initially. Yusaku falls in love with Sumire, the student council president, after she helps him pick himself back up when he's crushed by Taiga by offering him the vice president position on the student council. Through their shared work, he comes to see her as someone who cares enough about his growth to actively invest in his development as a person, and eventually he falls in love with her. She falls in love with him too, though the reasons she chooses not to pursue that relationship are, complicated to say the least. We'll get to that soon. Ami falls in love with Ryuji because he sees her and accepts her as she sees herself, but always challenges her to be better. He sees her as a scared child who, despite, being emotionally mature in some areas, struggles to be her authentic self around other people out of fear of being rejected or disliked. And unlike most people, he encourages her to come out of her shell in that regard. And finally, Ryuji and Taiga realize that they care and feel responsible for one another and end up falling in love near the end of the story, almost eloping and eventually getting back together about a year after the story's climax. All of these characters have strong fits of passion that lead them to falling madly in love with either people that they don't know, people that they do know but only as friends, or schoolmates. People who have a lot of issues that they need to resolve, or, as is often the case, all of the above at one point or another. Why? Well, the obvious answer is that they're kids. They don't know what love is. Or rather, they're still learning what love is. And they're kind of figuring it out as they go along. But they also haven't had to face the various trials and errors that those of us who consider ourselves seasoned warriors on the battlefield of love have encountered. They haven't yet had to endure the multiple heartbreaks, the innumerable disappointments, the countless nights spent staring at your phone on Tinder or Hinge hoping to God that you'll finally match with someone who is at least halfway interesting. Maybe that's just me. They've never had to date someone long term, only to see that relationship collapse like a house of cards, let alone be single after a breakup and try to figure out who they are again independent of the other person. So of course they don't know any better. Or at least, at a certain level that's true. Because at another level, these kids have a much better theory of mind and much better communication skills than I had at that age. And in fact, than I had until very recently, and I would say than most people I meet around my age have, period. It's why Ami can see the love triangle between Minori, Taiga, and Ryuji bubbling underneath the surface, even though each of the three parties involved are in one way or another in denial about the situation. It's why she can predict that there's a world of hurt waiting at the three-way intersection of Taiga's lack of awareness of her feelings for Ryuji, Minori's self-effacing altruism of her feelings for Ryuji, and Ryuji's crush on Minori and his paternal attitude towards Taiga. It's also why Taiga can so blatantly call out Sumire for being too cowardly to admit her feelings to Yusaku out of fear of hurting others or out of fear of being hurt herself. The irony is that in general, in such situations, more pain is created when one or multiple parties fails to own up to their feelings and either strings the other party along, or leaves without an honest conversation meant to provide both parties a sense of closure and security. I would know, this literally just happened to me like 3 months ago. I'm not blaming anyone here, but like, can't we just at least try to be honest with each other? Okay, so I guess it's time we answer the big question. What exactly is being in love, if it's not that miraculous moment of falling head over heels for someone? Well, for starters, being in love is an active form of concern for the life, growth, and development of another person. In other words, being in love is about caring. It's also an activity or something that we do consciously, as distinguished from falling in love, which is a passion and can feel passive, like something that just sort of happens to us. It's an activity that requires responsibility, not in the sense that we feel responsible for protecting an object that belongs to us from being stolen, please don't be possessive, but rather in the sense that we feel responsive to the needs and desires of the other person. Finally, being in love is about respect. It's about seeing the other person for who they are and would like to be on their own terms, not for whom we would like them to be for us. And it is about wanting them to grow and unfold as they are in their unique individuality. So, can we really say that there's anyone in Toradora who exemplifies being in love with another person? I don't think so. Most of the relationships in Toradora demonstrate what it's like to fall in love. But I don't think that there are very many, if at all any, relationships that demonstrate what it's like to be in love. At least none of the romantic ones do anyways. I think the closest we come to, at least romantically speaking, is the relationship between Taiga and Ryuji. Taiga and Ryuji end up developing feelings for each other over time. They grow close with the passage of the story and intimate as they aim to help each other seduce their respective crushes. Oh. Ironic, right? Taiga's best friend Minori and Ryuji's best friend Yusaku. Ryuji begins to care for Taiga and develops a sense of responsibility for her well-being over time. He takes care of cleaning her house and invites her over for meals on a regular basis. In a sense, he works to fulfill her needs to have a family and a support system around her that she lacks at the start of the series. He also feels responsible for her emotional and physical well-being. When her father attempts to walk back into her life, he does everything in his power to make that happen, even knowing that his return may signal her departure from their school and his life. He later realizes that his actions were at least partly driven by an egotistical desire to see his own father walk back into his life. And he aims to show that despite his selfish actions, he cares more about Taiga than anyone, save for Minori. He shows this by tying first with Minori in a school-wide race for the rights to have a dance with Taiga at the culture festival. Finally, near the end of the story, when Taiga elects to leave town in order to go back to her mom's home and work on herself, Ryuji respects her decision, even knowing that the one thing he'd like most in the world is to see her back in town with him. So yeah, I think that's probably as close as we get to a relationship where at least one of the parties comes close to exemplifying being in love with their partner. But ultimately, I think that even here, the way the show wraps up leaves some room to be desired. Taiga up and walked away from Ryuji's life without even having a real meaningful conversation with him about it. She did the same thing to her friends. Message left or not, that was fucked up. And although the show shows no sign of this, we could see how such an event might lead a lot of people towards feeling bitter or resentful. At the very least, it would leave the people left behind likely feeling abandoned and uncertain about whether or not they'd ever see Taiga again. We don't ever really see a resolution offered to this dilemma in the anime. Although, as Dylan J. Fox put it in his video on the dark ending of Toradora, link below by the way, we might surmise for Ryuji that the healthy, meaning, productively loving action to take in such a scenario would be to have an honest conversation with Taiga about his feelings regarding the whole affair. Should he choose not to, that would be tantamount to him showing that he's a doormat. The kind of person who can be walked all over by their significant other even when the latter has the best of intentions, but ends up committing a series of hurtful actions. And that, my friends, is a slippery slope to a toxic or destructive relationship. But then again, can we really say that there's anyone in the real world who exemplifies Erich Fromm's definition of being in love? Probably not. There aren't very many saints out there, just like there aren't very many devils. And maybe that's the difference between philosophy and practice that can't quite so easily be overcome. So, where does that leave us? Well, perhaps the only thing that we can do is to take a cue from another part of Erich Fromm's opus. Maybe the only thing that we can hope for is to try to perfect the art of loving another person, to learn the theory, to get out there and practice, and to try, like the starving artist, to sacrifice everything that we know to the art of loving another person. Starting with ourselves. And maybe that's what Toradora is trying to show us. By putting human relationships on full display as they are, messy, imperfect, and yes, sometimes toxic, but almost always threaded by the desire to do and be better, to love others and to love ourselves.